This is my testimony. This is my life with God to this point in my life, at least. And reflecting back on it the last couple of days, it's a rather interesting story. There's been lots of very interesting points in my life, both in this world, but then also with God. And God has made a huge, huge difference in my life. And the hope is to, in telling this story, which is just my story, to be an encouragement, an inspiration. And I'm sure also there will be many people who see this who know me, who in a variety of capacities and a variety of stages through life, some of which I will share that'll probably be somewhat surprising. Whenever you get to know people, you share things in part with individuals. You share little stories and little incidents with life, but perhaps here's a bit more of a narrative that maybe brings things a bit together. And it's all a big witness to the power and the goodness of God. He's been so good to me. And above all, I just will hope that this will be some inspiration, some encouragement for those who might watch this. So my name is Stephen. I'm just about 40 years old, and I grew up in North Dakota. My parents, my father and mother, were wonderful. It was a good family to grow up in, and we were raised Lutheran. We've got a couple of brothers, and we went to a local Lutheran church. There are a lot of Lutheran churches here in the Midwest. And growing up, we went to worship on Sundays. We went through Sunday school, some confirmation, moved halfway through confirmation. And at home, too, we prayed before meals, we prayed before bedtime. And, our religious practice was a part of our life. And even though it wasn't, I would say, the center of our lives, as occasionally, God would come up in conversation. Occasionally, especially if we might be acting out, might be brought in as a mode to encourage or discipline us. But I wouldn't say that God was really the focus or the center of our life, but it was certainly an aspect of our life. And it was also, I would say, fairly a little bit of a boring part of our life. It was getting off to church was always a little bit of a drag, and it was a little on the boring side. And at the same time, I could sense at church that there was something good there, that there was something that we should do, and it was altogether a healthy, positive thing that we should do in our lives, even if we drug our heels a little bit. And so that was my experience in church growing up, and it was something that I kept practice with more or less into my early adult years as well. And as I grew up, God was something more of an increasing interest to me. I remember coming across some works of C.S. Lewis, Mere Christianity, and a variety of his other works that challenged me to think a fair bit more deeply about faith. It was really interesting to have an intellectual presentation of the Christian faith and post some things that I hadn't thought of at all before, and to put them in such an eloquent, kind of compact, forceful way as he's known to write. And also, I went to a Christian camp that had a very positive impact on me. It was a little bit more open and energetic worship and prayer than I experienced in my Lutheran church, which was a little bit more formal. And that also, one summer of my life, had a impact, and it prompted me a bit to read the Bible a bit more. Even though reading the Bible and other spiritual practices weren't a prominent part of my life, they became so intermittently as I did have kind of growing and then waning interest in questions pertaining to God. And at the same time, there was, I would say, a fairly forward New Age component to my life, to my way of thinking, as I absorbed a lot of thoughts from the culture around me, and I got into meditation and even astrology, and these also formed part of my worldview. And just in a brief consideration, noting that there were other faiths in the world, other religions, as well as New Age insights, it seemed to me, at least my working assumption, even though of course didn't flesh this out rigorously, but just my working assumption as an adolescent, and as a young adult, was that yes, God exists. There seems to be some God. He's intelligent. He has a positive purpose, and we all have our individual calling that we should do in life, and be good people and so forth, and that this is part of a process that helps us to grow, to mature, to learn things especially, and that we do this in this life, and then perhaps we will live another life later, and the whole kind of aim of it all is growth, is learning and just knowing and so forth. And so this was my kind of my working worldview. Again, not terribly challenged or robust at the time. And as I was growing up, there came about some challenges, some conflicts in the house in which I grew up in. One of my family members was having a tough time at a particular period of his life. And me, in trying to get away from this, because it became somewhat chaotic at times at home, I sort of escaped into my schooling, my academics, as well as sports, as well as music, and just kind of threw myself fully into accomplishing in a variety of these areas. And it's, again, it was not like I thought this through. It was just sort of an instinctive response. And looking back, I see as some attempt to bring some to peace and stability, as well as some escape to my life and to my home, as that's where I found some sense of purpose, of accomplishment, as well as some peace and some approval and so forth in succeeding in these various areas. And so I really threw myself fully into them. And so much that kind of forewent a lot of social life, which was of decreasing interest and importance to me, and really focused on doing a good job in school and in sports and so forth. And a couple notable instances or important moments in my life were when actually I did have some success. I tried a number of different sports. I put myself really fully into them, and my ability didn't quite match my interest, my passion for them, but I was good at running, and so I had some success in running, and we had a good team actually. And so one year we happened to win the state championship, and I remember after winning that race, not me personally, but our team did, I remember afterwards just feeling surprisingly how empty it was, just how meaningless it was relative to the effort that we put into it. And it's kind of a painful endeavor of running, long distance running. And I was just really, it was a real letdown at that moment and then thereafter. And so too in school. I finished my schooling, doing very well in my school, and receiving awards and so forth, and finishing right at the top of the class. And at the same time, then too, it was a real letdown for me because I had put so much work into this. It had been really the center of my life, and accomplishing what I'd set out to aim for, even though I hadn't really thought things through. I didn't have a clear sense of what would be reasonable to expect to come from this and so forth. It was such a tremendous letdown. I know we feel that naturally when we complete a project of some kind and so forth. There's kind of like a releasing of pressure and so forth. But I was surprised. It took me back at how unsatisfied it was. And so I went off to college, and there too I went to a liberal arts college, kind of a classical college, not too far from where I finished high school, and likewise was disappointed both with the rigor at school, with kind of the interest and the commitment of my fellow students, with just the quality of studies as they were being conducted and taught, and so too doing well in these. I just felt again kind of an emptiness, and then I really began to drift, because in all these things that I had been putting my importance in, all of my attention to, what I intuitively thought would give me meaning and purpose and fulfillment and reward, satisfaction, and so forth, I found that every time I accomplished what I had set out to do after great exertion, it was meaningless and empty. And I started to kind of hit this again and again. And it started to really kind of disorient me as I started to lose a lot of motivation to excel and succeed and apply myself, because I found that when I did, I wasn't happy. I simply wasn't happy. And there was, of course, a great deal of pain and suffering and sacrifice to accomplish these ends. And again, I didn't have the language or categories even to understand what was going on, but this was my experience at the time. I ended up switching colleges to focus on theater, as it was kind of a growing interest of mine. I had studied piano as a youth, and so I had some interest in the arts, and acting was something that I both had some interest in, and it was something that an astrologist who had given some input into my life said that I was going to be an actor. So I thought, well, that's what I'm supposed to do. It kind of fits my interests. That's what I'll do in life. So I transferred schools that had to a local university, University of Minnesota, that had a large theater program, and started doing it. And I found that I just wasn't happy. I didn't fit in with the group really terribly well, even though I had some interest in the subject. And was isolated a lot at the new school. I didn't really know anybody. And was also, again, somewhat aimless. And I began to get more and more depressed as time went by. And the last couple of years of my college life, and I had been kind of increasingly depressed at the end of high school and beginning of college, but the last couple of years of college were a real dark time for me. It just kind of compounded. And I began to get more and more depressed and heavy, and my everything just seemed dark, increasingly so, and sad and heavy and pointless. And I became more and more depressed. And, I kept on thinking that in this worldview that I had to keep, this was my mission in life, this was my purpose, my calling, this is what I was supposed to do. And I, just had to buckle down and push through this and suffer through this, and that things would altogether come together in the end, and I would fulfill my purpose here in this world. But my depression kept on getting worse and worse, and I eventually became suicidal. And those last couple of years, it was every day, multiple times a day, I'd be dealing with suicidal thoughts. And the only thing actually, and this is really sad to hear, but the only thing that brought me relief was, the final coming to the determination, okay, I will end my life. And then finally I felt some release, some peace, knowing that this was somewhat temporary, that it was going to end. And eventually this just kind of continued to compound, and I couldn't sleep. I lost the ability to, eat food, retain food, and my ability to focus I could not comprehend, understand, make progress in the books in front of me. And I basically put a pause on my schooling. And very fortunately, very fortunately, I got some medical intervention and found a good counselor. Went on some medication that did help. That did lift my mood. Did allow me to get back healthy again and get back and complete my studies. And so I'm never going to poo-poo that whatsoever. People, if they do need help, please reach out, let people know, and avail yourselves to the resources that are out there, because I can help, absolutely. And so that got me through college, and immediately after college, I got a job opportunity in New York through a piano teacher of mine who had a connection out there in New York City. So I thought, well, I want to be in acting. This is what I feel I should do. And so, sure, let's give New York a shot. Let's see what the scene is like. And I moved out there. And I got this job in publishing out there, which is down in the financial district. And interestingly, as I was there in New York City and taking in a lot of the cultural offerings of the city, it was a very impressive city, very busy. It was an important city in terms of business, finance, culture, so forth. And especially down in the financial district, where I was able to interact with a lot of people working on Wall Street and, with big important companies, have lunch with these guys and such. It was interesting. It was an interesting time. And at the same time, as I was out there, I started to notice the same tendencies of thinking, the same mood, the same mindset creeping back into my life. And as I was out there after a few months there, this was really coming back again, kind of full steam. And after just some more disappointment out there, I came to the conclusion, like, I'm going to be dealing with this my whole life. This has been a bear on my back that I just cannot shake off. I cannot go through this again. And although my love for my parents, especially my father, who had some significant loss in his life, had really kept me going through those couple dark years in college, and not wanting to give up, not wanting to, fail in my purpose in life, and certainly not wanting to break their hearts. That what kept me going. But I hit this place in New York that I was just, I cannot go on any longer. And one night I finally made the decision that, okay, this is it. I'm done. I cannot do this any longer. And so I made the decision to end my life. And it was somewhat surprisingly, again, when I made that decision, just the heaviness left, and I felt some peace. And right as I was about to do it, I took out a knife, right as I was about to do it, I had this sudden vision, and it was a vision of hell. And it was just a moment. It was just a moment of this place that was dark and full of suffering, and there were people there. And it was hell. And it totally shook me awake. It was like, boom, I was suddenly fully awake. What am I doing? What is going on? And I had no category for that because I had grown up in church. Hell wasn't a prominent teaching or anything. And I did not have any real way to conceptualize what this was, but it was suddenly very real. And I knew very clearly that what I was doing was not good, and I should not do this. And that totally shook me awake. And went home. And fortunately, very fortunately, I've not had nearly that degree of darkness again in my life. But it was something that really shook me, and something, again, which I had no really way to conceptualize as to what this was. And later on in New York, also, I had another experience that there was a church that I had been somewhat attending on the other side of the city, and they had an Easter vigil where people stayed up in shifts and prayed through the night on the eve of Easter. This was kind of a classic Christian tradition, at least at their congregation. So I signed up to do it, and there was a few people on the sign-up sheet, so I just said, well, since it's on the other side of town, and I don't know if I'm going to be able to get transportation across the park, at that time of day, I'll just stay at the church. I'll just pray through the night, and it'd probably be easier for me overall. So I just signed up to stay up there all night. And so in one of the kind of little chapels after the side in the sanctuary, there we stayed and prayed, and some people came and went, and as I was praying through the night, there too, I suddenly, in the middle of a prayer, I suddenly had this vision of Jesus. And Jesus just appeared to me again for just a moment, and I saw his face. And just the look on his face and the sound of his voice was just so beautiful and so, I can't describe it. I can't describe just how amazing, beautiful, good he looked, just the goodness in his face. And he said, just in a couple words, he said, "You are forgiven." And that also shook me, because again, I kind of just jolted awake, and I said, what do I need to be forgiven for? Because I always considered myself a pretty good person. And, forgiveness, being forgiven, even though, again, I was raised in church, it was more of a mainline church that really didn't emphasize, like, traditional Christian doctrine or traditional biblical preaching. And I go, perhaps there's things I need to be forgiven of, but this it wasn't forefront of my mind. I wasn't asking for forgiveness. I wasn't seeking this. I wasn't burdened by a sense of conviction or anything. But the word that he had for me was that you are forgiven. And that was strange to me at the time, but I remembered it. And eventually, I folded down my endeavor in New York and moved on back to the Midwest, where my family was. And was kind of puzzling over these. And moving back to Minnesota, I began to think, well, maybe I should go into ministry, because I had just had these powerful experiences and faith in God, which saved my life. And faith in God somehow was quite a bit more important to me. I thought maybe I should go and serve as a pastor or something. And I looked into it, and I interviewed a few pastors and did some research and so forth, and I just had the sense, like, this is going to be really boring, and I kind of don't want to do this. I just don't feel drawn. I feel like I should be an actor. It's what my sense is, again, from New Age information that had been communicated to me, that was what I was supposed to do. And so I eventually folded that exploration and just got a variety of different jobs, waiting tables and working in business and administration, doing some music accompanying and so forth, and just piecing things together. Well, I kind of dipped my toes back in and out of acting for a few years there in the Twin Cities. And kind of got back on my feet in a way and got some experience under my belt. And eventually, after a few years there, I had an opportunity from my agent, who also had an office in Los Angeles, to move out to Los Angeles. It just seemed like a good move, There was some good experiences in the Twin Cities, but there was a lot more opportunity, of course, in Los Angeles. And I thought, maybe film would be a place where I could find some projects that really excited me or interested me, or that I would be a good fit for, as I was having difficulty finding theater projects that were a real great interest and or a real great fit. Projects that I really was excited about, because there was always something kind of missing, something not entirely what I was looking for in the theater world. And so I moved out to Los Angeles, and I was there for a couple years. And LA was interesting city. I tell people I made a lot of great friends there, which I did. But it's different. It's a totally different mindset, a different way of life, a different location than the Midwest or even than New York. And there in LA, I had a tough time getting my feet on the ground. It just felt very unstable for me, especially for the first year. Just the whole vibe, the way things worked and flowed, the way that people operated was just different. It just felt very fluid in a lot of ways. And was tough for me to acclimate to Los Angeles in California. But I did get involved in the film scene. I worked with a film producer for a while, did some small bit parts here and there in some small projects, small low budget films and so forth, just getting some experience. And interestingly also, I had the opportunity through a roommate. I moved into a house for a while, and one of the roommates there had worked for a catering company, kind of an elite catering company in Los Angeles. And I too then was kind of bopping around between a few different jobs, to bring in some money. And he decided to put in a recommendation for me at his company. And I guess he'd been with them for about 10 years or so, and he had never given a recommendation, but we'd gotten to know each other a little bit, and he just felt like he should do this, or he wanted to. So he put in a good word for me, and they hired me. And it turned out to be a stable job, which was great. And it was kind of fun. There was a lot of really interesting people kind of in that world, especially in Los Angeles. And but of most interest was that through this kind of in a backdoor kind of way, I was suddenly in a lot of events with really important and wealthy people. Many of the wealthiest and the most famous people, a lot of celebrities, a lot of very top of the world business people and so forth. I was, working parties for them, conventions, award ceremonies, as well as receptions at their homes, after parties, and also even in business too. I worked for a company, a very, very large financial company. I was working at the top floor of them, helping them set up for events and so forth and for meetings. And through this, I got to see really the tops of both the entertainment and the financial worlds, just kind of being a fly on the wall. And it was a real blessing in my life, because I got to see what many of these people's lives were like behind the scenes, when the camera wasn't running, when meetings weren't in progress. And I just could sense in a lot of people who people look to, very, very famous people, everyday names. There was just an emptiness there. There was, most of the time they seemed kind of distracted, preoccupied. I didn't get a sense of happiness, of joy, of fulfillment, of satisfaction, as I kind of, again, intuitively thought there would be, that was somewhat driving me, that if I were successful, that I would be happy and fulfilled. You just kind of imagine this. You imbibe this from our culture and yes, through entertainment as well. And seeing them actually in real life, I found myself, interacting with them and so forth, visiting with them, being with them in their homes. I just had this continuing sense that even if I did happen to be successful, which again was a long shot, it's a very chancy field, I thought, even were I to succeed, I wouldn't be happy. I wouldn't have a wonderful life, working with, doing projects with, people like this and doing this kind of work day in, day out. Just would not be happy for me. And at the very same time, I had fallen in with a local Lutheran congregation in the neighborhood. It was just kind of the closest Lutheran church to where I was when I first moved out there. And there, in stark contrast to the work that I was doing, the people at this church, this little neighborhood church, were so friendly. They were so alive. They were so happy and welcoming. And I found myself more and more in my free time being over at the church and helping out with little projects, or going to evening services, or singing in the choir, or kind of a variety of things, helping out with worship in various ways. And I just found this joy there, this goodness there. And especially being where I was in the city, it was just the contrast between the two. The world and the church was just so different. And as time went by, I got more and more interested again in thinking about possibly going and serving in the church. At the very same time, I was invited to a talk by a particular individual who was a counselor, and she especially focused on counseling pastors and priests and working with clergy. And she was a brilliant elderly lady, very spiritually deep, and somewhat surprising to me, a very committed Christian. And she was incredibly wise, incredibly insightful, incredibly gifted in knowledge and in speaking. And I super enjoyed getting to know her and visiting with her. And through her, I was invited to an evening service at this Lutheran congregation that I was attending. And it was a charismatic service, which was new to me. I had never even really heard of this before, especially in the Midwest. And so I went to this evening service. And there, people were getting slain in the Spirit. And again, I hadn't even heard of this word before. But people would go up and they'd be prayed for by the worship leaders, and they'd just kind of fall back. It's like someone was like knocking them out. And so I went up for prayer, and so too, the pastor came up and just prayed over me, and just like in an instant, knocked back. I felt it was just flooded with this peace. It's this total peace and light, and it's hard to articulate. I can't put it into words, but it's just so full of rest, entirely full of rest, and just felt so good. And I just lay there and just enjoying this peace for minutes. And so too, thereafter I began at different times speaking in tongues, and this also wasn't a thing that I had any category for growing up in my kind of mainline Lutheran upbringing. And tongues would come to me sometimes, before communion, especially when praying for people, times of just kind of deep spiritual presence where the Spirit was there, tongues would just come to me. And so too, even to this day, they come to me at kind of random occasions, especially very holy times. And it's not something that I can make myself do. I can remember how they sound, but I cannot will them to happen, but they just come to me, and we'll just like start praying softly in tongues. And this again was something entirely foreign to me. But it really vivified my life with God, and I became much more interested in learning about the Scriptures, and church was much less boring or a ho-hum or kind of going through the motions than it was before. There was something really alive here, something really meaningful here, and God was suddenly very real to me, and I wanted to know Him. And increasingly I wanted to serve Him in some way. So I began to pray, had some counseling with some pastors again in Los Angeles this time, and began to pray about whether I should go into ministry. And through that period of time, when I brought it to the Lord in prayer, there's only been a couple times in life where I really felt the Lord speak to me almost audibly in my heart. It was a voice, a clear voice that came to me several different times when I was praying the same prayer. Lord, should I go to seminary? Should I do this? Should I go into ministry? And I had the very clear sense that the Lord speaking to me, go to seminary, go to seminary. And so I decided to finally heed this voice, especially as I wasn't, super happy in the field that I kind of came out to Los Angeles to do. I kind of felt this train had sort of come to its end. And so I said, okay, we'll go to seminary. We'll take this leap. I prayed about where to go. I was thinking maybe staying where I was in Los Angeles. That was a really good school, Fuller, that was just literally a mile away from where I was living at the time. And there was another Lutheran school up the road, up in San Francisco in Berkeley. So these were the two kind of most prominent ones. Was praying about them, and I had this vision of, again, I've only had a couple of visions too in my life, just this vision of this bay with water that was full of sailboats. And it just, going up to visit this school in Berkeley, this Lutheran college, this Lutheran seminary, one morning I went out and was able to see from where I was this bay that was what I had seen in my vision. And so I took that along with, was offered a very generous scholarship to go to this school, as well as I had this encouragement to go there from the lady who was kind of my mentor at that time. And so I decided to, all right, we're going up to the Bay Area, to Berkeley, to study to study theology and prepare myself for ministry. This is what I'm going to do. And going up to Berkeley was an interesting experience again. Of course, I didn't really fit in terribly well. And I found there that most of the students, as well as seemingly many of the staff at the school, were very progressive, not surprisingly for Berkeley. Very progressive, very liberal Christians, which, liberalism in theology is a little bit different than conservatism and liberalism in politics. There's some overlap, but they're a little bit different in many, but it was a very liberal theological school. And with generally a lower view of Scripture, more emphasis on social justice, on doing positive things as people, and there wasn't nearly the depth of spiritual experience that I had experienced down in Los Angeles immediately previously. And there I felt a little bit adrift. There wasn't a real deep emphasis on devotional practices of reading the Scriptures and meditating on them, on deep prayer, on really, really vibrant worship. Again, most of it was around thinking, theology, writing, research, and finding ways to change society for the better, through politics, especially through protests, and through human effort. And so I was again a little bit disconnected from most of the student body there, but just kind of kept my head down and pushed through. Although I was a little bit of an odd duck there, I suppose. And finally, after a couple years of theology there, went off to serve in a congregation, which we do 1 year of internship in our seminary program. And the congregation that I matched with was about an hour and a half, maybe about 2.5 hours up the road in the North Central Valley of California. And I was a small, rural, small-town congregation. And there I did my internship year as a solo pastor. And through a variety of workings was able to continue there and was ordained there, continued serving there for a total of about 7 years. And for a few years served another Lutheran congregation nearby as well. And so I was finally in ministry, in full-time ministry. And it was a wonderful experience in a lot of ways. Wonderful people, really good people at both congregations. We did a lot of good things, a lot of helping the poor in the community in a variety of ways, worshiping, educating the young, classes, Bible studies, and I got wrapped up in all the programs. And this is the experience that I had, I think, was common to a lot of pastors, in that just the demands of pastoral life, perhaps especially today, but there's all sorts of needs for visitation, for classes, for emergency relief, for planning programs, for planning worship, for managing the finances of the congregation, for managing the property of the congregation. Just lots and lots and lots to do. And I found myself in this time, while enjoying it, it was also very exhausting at the very same time. And I found myself not making time for devotions, for reading the Scriptures apart from, say, preparing for a class or a sermon, for deep time of refreshment in prayer with God. And I found myself, while I was at the same time somewhat overextended, I found myself losing my zeal, my zest, my deep commitment to the Lord, and also being away from, much more charismatic, you could say, or really spiritually alive and super committed Christians, being somewhat alone, especially as a young minister. It was somewhat isolating in some ways, and I felt, that zeal begin to fade over time, and began to just sort of settle into kind of how would you say, as kind of a resigning, or as an acceptance that this is what ministry is and this is what I should do. And at the same time, I found, even though I was in ministry, I found, because I was detached from a lot of my devotional practices, and they weren't as forefront of my mind, I noticed other things coming forward in my life, in the flesh, things like pride, or impatience or anger or lust or wanting to look good in the view of others, putting higher priority on accomplishment, church accomplishment in terms of attendance, in terms of finances, in a variety of these areas, just becoming more worldly, less spiritually grounded, less grounded in God, more worldly in my thinking. And it was just kind of a gradual process that, although I struggled against it, I fought against it, it was just not, I just wasn't as spiritually alive as I wanted to be and as I had been at one time. And so this was a time of rich ministry in a lot of ways, wonderful people in a lot of ways, but also a little bit of a loss of really depth of faith. And as this time went by, there was some good ministry done, and then also challenges just with the congregation. So a lot of remodeling work. There were some natural disasters. There was some congregational life issues. Not major issues, but congregational life just has its own challenges. And as time went by, it became kind of clear to me that it would be time to be looking for another congregation to serve. And right at the beginning of 2020, I began to hear the voice from the Lord again as I was praying what I should do. And I began to get this real sense again when I would ask God, what should I do? I got this clear sense of Him telling me to go back to Minnesota. Go to Minnesota. Go to Minnesota. This would be the constant thing that I would get when I would pray to God what I should do. And I kept on asking Him, what should I do when I get there? Should I be looking for another congregation to serve out there? I interviewed at a few congregations kind of in the years prior, kind of in the Midwest as well. Should I be looking for a congregation to serve? And the sense that I got was just continually, go to Minnesota, I'll show you what to do when you get there. And I was still really puzzled as to how this was going to come about, what I should do, how I should make this jump, this change. But I had this continuing sense that this was from the Lord, and this was even before the pandemic really hit. From that did transpire, in the spring of 2020. This began even prior to that, and ultimately towards the end of the year, it came about that things just kind of came together where it did seem practical to leave and move back to Minnesota. And so I concluded my ministry with the two congregations and said farewell. And I just had this sense at the same time that I should do video ministry in some capacity and that the Lord would show me what to do when I get back here. And so eventually I did, and things came together, and I found myself back in Minnesota and set up a little nonprofit organization and found a place to make videos such as this. And this is what I've been doing for the last couple of years since, on and off. And it's been a little bit hard because I've been praying to the Lord what types of videos I should make, and He hasn't been really clear to me. He's just been telling me to just keep making videos, and that He'll show me what to do in the making of them. And so I've tried a lot of different stuff here on this channel. You may be familiar with some of the videos that have been put up. But also, coming back here, I've again fallen in with a more charismatic church. And a visit, even though I attend and worship with a few other churches, I've got connected with a more spiritually, just spirit-filled church where my experiences are more normal, and experiences of healing, which I didn't mention, but also in Los Angeles, I had my foot healed just miraculously at a healing service, just instantaneously, and heard many other similar stories to that effect from other people who were in the same kind of worship groups as I was. And so getting connected with this congregation, even though I'm not serving as a pastor, I've recently got involved in doing street ministry and evangelism, and have been deeply encouraged in really deepening my time again with the Lord in prayer, in the Scriptures, in wanting to be more bold with sharing my faith with others directly, being more confident sharing my faith online and so forth. And so I've again gotten sort of reconnected to real deep spiritual vitality. And at the very same time, it's been a time of a lot of failure. we haven't got a lot of traction on this video ministry. There's been a lot of setbacks, a lot of delays, a lot of things that haven't worked. And yet I feel the Lord continuing to tell me to keep at this particular ministry, that He is continuing to guide me. And I feel day by day His real deep peace and His he shares with me guidance and wisdom. A lot of the little flesh issues in my life, he continues to prune off of me and free me of, and just to guide me into greater holiness, communion with him, and life with him. And it's been an incredibly rich time. And at the same time, despite all these years of various efforts of trying to do things, sometimes repeatedly putting all of my energy and time and focus and commitment into various things, all of them ultimately have kind of come apart in a variety of ways here or there, from jobs to relationships, even to ministry. They've just kind of all one after another kind of fallen apart. And this, looking back now from where I am now at midway through my life at about 40 years old, I see the Lord's mercy in this, and that he's allowed me to not have my worldly desires come about. And so much unknowingly has been driven by a desire for accomplishment, for success, for recognition, for the American dream in a lot of ways, of independence, of prosperity. That the Lord has not allowed any of this to come about, and it's actually been a really surprisingly, ironically, I'm sure a lot of people look at me and like, your life's not going so great. But at the same time, I know it's been a blessing, and that the Lord has let me not have the desires of my heart, and has brought me back again and again to humble me, to find my rest and my purpose in him, and my direction in him. And I find now really rest, at least at this point in my life, which, God, let me continue in this, just of deep spiritual richness and replenishment and guidance and hope and peace and love. Just feeling his love so deeply in my life and sharing his love with others is just so rich. It's so wonderful. And whatever the Lord has for me in the future, I really don't care all that much anymore in worldly terms, as long as I can continue to be with him and be a part of his life and his purpose. So that's my